So we are here for our last OQ, so we are just going to dive right in, starting with Miss Gutierrez's point on her OQ. So what is your question for discussion?
Yeah, so my question was, after Gregor becomes Bug, there's a certain period of time where Gregor's dad doesn't see him anymore. And when he first does see him again, Gregor's father is unable to recognize him, and he's unable to recognize his father. And I wanted to know, why is that? Was it because Gregor becomes Bug and he just doesn't see him as his son anymore? Or is it because when Gregor becomes Bug and his dad starts working again, he has this new sense of authority and power, and that's why he's unable to recognize him?
So then why does the father not? Yeah, so again, why does the father
Their relationship clearly changes, and I wanted to know what you guys thought about that and why.
I think maybe part of it has to do with, like, he feels ashamed that his son is a bug. Like, it's obviously out of the ordinary, and he's probably like, well, I'm not gonna go like brag about this to other people and be like, yeah, look at my son, he's a bug. So there's a sense of like shame that he wants to like hide from, I guess, the outside world, because they also do fire, I believe, like the cook or like the cleaning woman or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're like embarrassed about that, and also like I'm pretty sure somewhere in the story it said like his dad like feared, like, was it roaches? I'm pretty sure, like,
Yeah, I think so.
I'm pretty sure it said his
It was
father.
in the middle, yeah.
Yeah. So I just think that like the fact that his son was a bug that he had like feared kind of made him like resent that, and see him less as a son and more of just the bug.
Mm-hmm.
I think his father, I mean, I agree with what Misan said. Like, I think his father views him more like in an embarrassing way, because like if you don't, I mean, if your son's a bug and like he's not doing anything to like support the family, then like why would you want to even notice him? Like, and why would you want other people to even notice him as well? So like I feel like he's more embarrassed at the fact that like his son isn't doing anything, the fact that he's a bug. So like that's why he doesn't want to go ahead and brag about.
I guess you can say the same thing for when his dad wasn't working. Like, he could have viewed him as the same way.
Yeah.
You know.
True.
I think what's interesting about this question is, we've hinted at the fact that like maybe this is a metaphor for Gregor having mental illness or being depressed or something like that. And I think it's a very plausible situation where parents might not know how to deal with and might even be embarrassed of a son or daughter who has these mental disabilities. It's a sad situation, but I definitely think that it's plausible in real life.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, and I think Gregor didn't recognize his father because for all these years he wasn't working, and he was just a stay-at-home dad, and he became powerful, like you said earlier, and he doesn't know that side of his dad, the working side of dad.
Especially the uniform too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it mentions like, I know he sees that his dad kind of stays in the uniform all the time and doesn't really end up. He just falls asleep in the chair in the middle of the living room, and like I think from their standpoint, they're just in this situation where they don't, like you said, they really don't know how to handle.
Yeah, there's these two market. Yeah, you're right. Like the father's changed as well, though, that you guys have pointed out. But also there's a sense of embarrassment. I think that going along to like what might be a possible real world connection. You mentioned how there's this misunderstanding for mental illness. I think the father's example on page 49, where he talks about how he suddenly gets violent, brandishing both newspaper and stick, and the idea that in the midst of this crisis, we see several portrayals of how people responded to this bug transformation, and Gregor's father being one of violence. And so why does the father not recognize him? Well, because he is indicative in the author's mind of a violent response to crisis. And that in this moment, he is more thinking about attack, about preservation by kind of more aggressive means. So why does he not? All these kind of make sense. So there's a sense of embarrassment, a sense of questioning the son's sanity, about the relationship that exists between the two, and then the act itself kind of solidifies this sharp break in kind of the ability for these two characters to relate in the context of this story. But that is a good question, kind of relating to the whole overall theme of like what are the relationships that exist and why are they so important and why are they so distinct amongst one another. So I guess moving on then. Ms. Sullins, what is your question for discussion today?
My question was, why was the sister so compassionate and caring at the beginning of the Metamorphosis? Like, she begins and like sneaks food to him, and which shows a certain level of like kindness and relationship that they have together. But at the end, she basically blames Gregor for everything. On page 107, it says, the real disaster is that we believed this for so long, but how could it be Gregor? If it were Gregor, it would have realized a long time ago that it isn't just that it just isn't possible for human beings to live beside such a creature and it would have gone away on its own. So like why does what causes that shift and like that lack of empathy, and like kind of like paralleling that with the Hunger Artist, like there's like a lack of empathy from just like the general crowd of people, and like they find like entertainment and pleasure in someone's like suffering, and I guess you could say mental illness, going back on Ms. Gutierrez's point.
Yeah, no, and I guess, I mean, just to tack on one extra bit, in 79, she's the only one to call him Gregor. So what is this very...
Because it's a very personal
180.
relationship that they have, and he like looks up to her and he says like, you know, he'll fund her like college, and like once the violin broke also, that was like their last sense of like hope, I guess, of like looking up in his eyes. And I just wonder what was her, why was there a change in demeanor? Like what, if she had initially thought that, why did she go through all those lengths to sneak in food and care and tend to him?
Yeah, so the relationship between these two characters and the larger question of a lack of empathy. So
Yeah.
I guess what is the distinction between the two, or what do people have to say?
I think that it's a like kind of talking about humanity in a way, because in the beginning she is like a child or a teenager. We don't really know. Like I think there's a distinct shift between her in the beginning of the story and her in the end of the story. Because in the end of the story, I mean, it does remark on her like her appearance, because she does like grow up and she becomes a woman. And like I think part of it is that she was feeding Gregor when she was still a child, and she was still like kind of naive in a sense. And then when she loses that sense of innocence, she like is the one to like actually like say that he has to like go, because she becomes an adult at that point. So I think part of it can be just, you know, speaking to humanity in a sense that even though these like things are happening to these people, like life goes on, and like as a you know an adult, like she's trying to move on with her life, even though her brother is basically like trapped and confined into this room in a bug's life. So I think that part of it is just speaking towards humanity and like towards the fact that like no matter what, life is gonna you know still continue to go on.
So does does the loss of innocence also include, I guess going off of this and someone else can comment, is a lack of innocence as a result of growing up equate to a lack of empathy?
I think so. I think that, you know, children are kind of the first ones to look at situations and empathize for somebody. Children are the ones that say, you know, this is something that's wrong is happening, why is this happening, and look at it from like kind of a simplistic perspective. So I can definitely see Ms. Gutierrez's point that as a child, she would say that this is my brother, this is something that needs to be taken care of. But from an adult perspective, without that innocence, with a lack of empathy, she is now looking at it from the more logistic point of view, that bills need to be paid, that she needs to go to work, that her family needs to go to work, and this is her obstacle. She's no longer putting emotion towards this person. This is now just an obstacle in her path of becoming an adult, moving on.
I agree with you. I feel like as she's growing up, she's realizing that she can't have that obstacle, but also for people with mental illness, like you said earlier, sometimes their caregivers can give up on them because they have their own lives to live, and this situation can be similar to those situations, and that's why like most mentally ill people end up as homeless, because they don't have anyone to care for them.
And I thought maybe like the sister kind of like thought like there was no going back for him, like they waited and waited for him to go back to being human, and since they realized like he wouldn't, she was like, all right, well I might as well like move on with my life. That's what I concluded.
So, and that's what I guess the overall theme is, one of maturation and a loss of innocence, and then empathy. So I guess maybe for the rest of us then, is there a point when that happens, or is like a pinpoint, a specific moment in the text or in the story that we can say, this is when she really grew up, and like what would that be for her?
You know, I don't know. I think she really grew up to me when Gregor starts to notice like how talented she is, when she starts playing the violin, and he starts thinking about sending her to music school, and then from there she just seems to become more mature over time and toward the end of the text. And so I think from that point on is when we definitely see her change in empathy, because before she was more empathetic to Gregor, but then towards the end she just wants to get rid of him.
Yeah.
So
I was gonna say, you have any thoughts on when she might have, like, when did she pivotally grow up, or when do we see that kind of shift?
I think the point is when she starts getting a job, while her parents do, and I mean, she obviously doesn't have time to go in and feed him every day because she has her own stuff to do for the family.
Yeah.
And I guess it's not really, it's not that she's not empathetic, it's just there's no time anymore.
Yeah, no, and I think Miss Sipling, Mr. Marks, you bring up that like that practicality, and I think that it's illustrated perfectly when they're first she wants to help with the moving out process, and she's really involved in caring for him, and then at the very end is commenting on how he's chasing away lodgers and getting us all to sleep in the gutter. That she is moving from caring about this one person to kind of thinking more broadly about the prospects of her family. So I think like it's really kind of interesting. We see the growth of this one person, this metamorphosis of a character, and how it's impacted her empathy as much as it has her relationship with her brother. So that's okay. So as we've got one relationship addressed, the father and the bug, and then now the sister and the bug. So I guess moving forward, what's another question we have for the metamorphosis?
My question has to do with the ending, and we see this progression in all of the characters, and see how the father got a job, mother I believe got a job also, the sister, but it wasn't until Gregor died that these three characters leave the home and then take on a new perspective and start thinking about the future, that their daughter might get married, what their rest of their lives are going to look like. So my question is, did Gregor have to die in order for them to gain this power, this independence?
I think in a sense, like, yes, because like he was the catalyst that began them to like kind of, get their lives together, and before that he was the one taking care of them, so they were just like sitting around doing nothing. So unless like their like source of like living, which is him, because he was the one basically providing for the family, once that was gone, that kind of forced them to be able to like get their lives together, get jobs, and find them things to do, and like have like a sense of purpose in the world. But Gregor was able to take that away from them because he felt like he bared the responsibility of like supporting his family. So I think it like had to be done because their family just like was kind of unconventional in the sense that they were already neglectful.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there was definitely like a dependent shift. Like I think at the beginning of the story, it was clearly that Gregor supported the family and they were all dependent on him. And then I think when he became a bug, they had no choice and they were kind of forced into depending only on themselves and not Gregor. And I think because of that, it like resulted in ultimately like them all getting jobs and them all like moving on with their lives and like becoming a different like version of themselves. And I think that that's a very important part of the story, is like realizing that like it had to happen in order to like act as a catalyst for them to like change their lives. Because I think if not, it would have remained stagnant and they wouldn't have realized like what they were going through.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You were gonna say something.
I'm like still thinking of like a counter argument for that, but yeah, if you guys like have something else to say, or something.
Yeah, Gregor, he didn't necessarily have to die because for them it's in their head that Gregor was holding them back from what they had to do, like work. It's not like they were caring for him, so they were, they had to be stuck home caring for him. He did not have to die, but for them to move on and to feel independent, in that situation he had to die.
Well, like, I mean, I just didn't understand, like, why, like, why move on? Like, why not, like, try to look for your son? Like, they just kind of just completely erase him from their lives, like, that's what I didn't understand. Like, they decided to be independent in the end, but, like, I don't know, they just, like, kind of just...
They just discarded him.
Yeah, they just
Like,
disregarded him, yeah.
And I think the words they used to describe that, I've underlined it, encircled. Harris Sampson says, "Now we can thank God." And I'm like, that's kind of a harsh way of sending off your son. And I've like written, "Can we?" And can we thank God? And I think that that kind of elucidates how profoundly he was anchoring their lives to this situation. And then the following pages, we see them leave the apartment for the first time, that we see a shift. So, I mean, like, in a harsh way, did he have to die? The characters certainly seem to believe so. They think that he's been holding them back, and that his, kind of like, their family life has been about as emaciated as the corpse described on 112, just kind of dead and not really sustained and not really healthy. But I guess you get the last word. So you get to pronounce judgment. Did Gregor have to die at the end
I
of
don't
the
think he
metamorphosis?
necessarily had to die,
Mm-hmm.
but he definitely had to just go somewhere else.
Mhm.
We talked about like how selfless he is, and that he would probably do anything to. Like, if he understood that he was being a burden to them, he probably would have just left on his own
Mhm.
to benefit the family as a whole. So.
I thought it was also interesting how like at the beginning he seemed to be like the rock and like the glue to the family, and then towards the end he became the thing that like dismembered them all.
Yeah.
I think also he was in a lot of pain though. I think that, I mean, even if he did remain in that room, I think he needed to die because he kind of needed to be released of even his own burden that he was carrying. Of even when he was still a buck, he was still having that burden of the family and what was like, how are they and like how are their jobs and like, you know, I think that dying kind of released him of that. I know that sounds like very dark, but I do.
Well, I think this brings us nicely into Nestor's question, or sorry, Mr. Castellon's question of death, right? Because that's what you wanted to focus on as well.
Yeah.
That's your question.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
cool. Yeah. So yeah, my question was basically like how does he die? Like, does he starve himself to death, or like does he just lose the will to live, or like was it just like because his family just ultimately just if they were ultimately like responsible for his death through negligence? So like what I thought about was like, you know, I think he just gave up. Like he just gave up on his life, because if you really wanted your family to know that you were the bug, you would try to like, you know, create like a message out of like maybe like letters or something that you found on the floor, like other objects, you know, like he really didn't try. Like he just sat there and he just thought about his family. He didn't really try to like be like, hey, like this is me, you know, I'm a bug now, like, you know, can you help me out? But he didn't. Like
He like sulked in his misery, basically.
basically, yeah, he just sulked in his misery and he just gave up.
And I think the giving up is captured on 110. He says that he remained in this state of empty, peaceful reflection until the clock struck at 3, and then his head sank all the way to the floor without volition, and from his nostrils his last breath faintly streamed. Like he gave no effort. Like he kind of closed out.
I think
without
he just said he felt like there was no sense of purpose for him now.
Mhm.
Like why carry on his life if he can't provide for his family, which is what he primarily wanted to do? Then why live if he can't help his sister and, you know, do all the things that he had hoped to do? What's the point?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
there's no fight.
Yeah, because I mean, like he really cared about his family, and like, and at the end when he hears them say like, you know, at the end they say that his family saw this bug was not Gregor. Like they just like automatically assume like, okay, like this bug isn't Gregor, we're just gonna give up on it. You know, like that I think struck him the hardest when he had to hear them say that. So.
I agree. I think he definitely lost his drive, you know, to live. But I also think that it was a matter of the apple was in his back. I mean, it never came out, like the apple that was thrown in him. So I think he was in a lot of physical pain, and I think that, you know, like that had a lot to do with it too. And I also think that he wasn't eating anything for like weeks and months. Like we don't know exactly the time period, but I mean, with all of those three things combined together, I think that's ultimately why he just lost his will,
And then like
you know?
combined with like the mental pain of like having to go through, you know,
and the burden,
the burden of like not helping his family and having to hear them say that they're giving up on him. You know, I think that takes a toll on him along with the physical pain. So.
I think it's interesting that you brought up the apple and how like the apple was still there. I think that is a really good, like, it just parallels that, you know, this is something that's lasting on him, that this pain that his father has inflicted on him, this complete loss of, you know, this isn't my son anymore, this is nobody that I know, is staying with Gregor, just like the apple is staying on his back. And that, I think, is what drives him to give up in the end. That, you know, even from the beginning, like, he's dedicated his life, his human life, as well as his bug life, where he's continually trying to make his family more comfortable with his situation. He's trying to hide himself, he's trying to like cover himself, trying to get out of their way as much as possible, trying to be respectful in every which way. His life is dedicated towards his family, and this constant reminder that they no longer see him or appreciate the things that he's doing, I think is what drives him.
Yeah.
And I guess merging this question to the larger theme of like, well, then why do we die? Is it the endless toil of life? Is it the pain and suffering that comes with it? Or is it the neglected relationships that kill us? And like, what is then the commentary there as well? I think that the Kafka's trying to ask. So I guess.
I think it's like all though, because like in his other story, The Hunger Artist, like the guy didn't see a purpose in like living. Like he didn't care after a certain point. Like there was a lack of human empathy towards some people. He went unacknowledged and unnoticed, and so he basically felt unworthy.
I was gonna say.
I think there's a difference between Gregor's death and natural death. Gregor, he died emotionally before he died naturally, physically. He was really selfless throughout the whole story. Like you said, trying to make his family accustomed to his being a bug, and at the end he died because nobody seemed to care, even as time went on.
Mr. Marsh, what do you think?
I think it has to do with losing your purpose in life, because Gregor was so accustomed to just working every day, and that's all he really knew. So once he can't do that, and he's kind of just stuck in a room with nothing to do. That's like his loss of having purpose anymore.
Yeah, no.
So,
I think that there's an interesting contrast between what we see with Gregor suffering in his condition, right? And also kind of feeling the pain of this emotional relationship, being detached, and then kind of giving up, versus his family. Like his mother had asthma and fainting spells, yet she went out to work and kind of persevered. Her father having struggling with his health as well, still carrying forward and trying to provide for the family. So I think that there's even to a greater extent the contrast given between how Gregor dies as a bug, but then the similar parallels to how the family dies as well. So I mean, both these questions, I mean, Mr. Letty's and Mr. Nestor's kind of call into question, well, how do we as humans deal with death? I mean, the whys and the hows, and what does that all mean for us as kind of the reader? But we kind of have to push forward. So, Mr. Marsh, kind of looking to you, what's your question for discussion?
Mine's more general. So if you guys put yourself in Gregor's shoes, would life be harder as a human or a bug?
I mean, I feel like it would be harder as a bug, because at least as a human, like, you can argue and you can you know, you can tell people things that are on your mind, but like as a bug you can't. Like, you have to go out of your way and like do a lot of things to like try and communicate with somebody, but since you're a bug, you just can't. Like, I just feel like that would be super hard, like just not being able to communicate. Like, that just makes everything much more difficult.
I agree. I think like you lose a sense of freedom. Like as a bug, he obviously can't do the things, like can't go to work and everything like that, and he loses a sense of mobility, which results in him not being able to provide for his family. And so that right there is like what his purpose was, like I said earlier, and like that kind of affects him also emotionally too. And like I don't know, that like really kind of paralyzes him in a sense. So I think it's worse to be a bug.
I disagree, actually. I think that his life would have been harder as a human, because I think being a bug made him realize how used he was in his family. I think if he would have remained a human, like, they would have continued to like live off of him and like never get jobs. And I mean, how long could that have gone on until like eventually it takes a toll on him, and he, you know, either way, I think it would have affected him, but I think it would have taken longer if he would have remained human.
So yeah, so what you're saying is like if he had he remained a human and then he found out about like all those things later on, it would have taken a heavier toll on him than it was as a bug. Okay.
Yeah.
I definitely think
That's what I said.
it could be a little harder. I think both ways in a way. Like it's hard to emotionally find all that out.
The biggest difficulty for Gregor as a bug is the sense that he's now dependent on somebody. That he went from this role where he was the independent one and he had dependees. Now he's the one that is kind of at the mercy of somebody else aiding him. And I think that is just not an identity that he ever saw in himself. So that's kind of what I think is the hardest struggle for him. And that's why I think being a bug is the most difficult for him.
Right. Also, Gregor was cut off from his family, who he really appreciates and would do anything for, and that's also something that was hurting him as a bug, because they weren't able to accept him for who he has become.
I don't know if you said, Mr. Marsh, what's your pick?
That was mine.
Which one would you pick, human or bug?
With Ms. Gutierrez and Mr. Castellon, I thought that a human would be worse because he was being used the whole time, and if he ended up finding out that they had some money and things like that, I don't know, it would be worse.
I mean, like, I think it's easy to say. I mean, right off that, neither one's ideal. So I think that there's like your pick your poison kind of situation. My thought, kind of based off of 74, is that he talks about when the family's starting to move out the furniture and he's struggling to even remember what it's like to be human. And as he transitions more and more into his new role as this house pest, literally a bug, he's like forgetting what it's like to be human. And he finds a certain amount of mindless tedium to be almost enjoyable. Like, he kind of likes having the space to crawl around.
There's like a disconnect between like his mind and body.
Yeah.
And so like there's a huge disconnect, and like you can tell like when he goes to eat something that he formerly liked, like he doesn't like it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like his like transition as like a physical transition, but as well as like emotional too for him.
Mm-hmm. And he's like fighting his human nature as a human versus as a bug, and he's trying to like in between worlds, trying to choose one. It's very difficult for him, I think. Yeah.
Very much caught between two worlds. That's like, that's what, I mean, like, you think about that though, like, especially when people bring up like, well, he's still working though. He's either working and providing for people in this thankless position, or he is hated and reviled. But I wonder what are we in similar position as people, as readers? Like, are we either thoughtlessly, mindlessly doing tedium in the world, or are we hated for who we are, or do we have this kind of revulsion of people? So, this is not a very cheerful discussion. I realize this now. We've talked about death and broken relationships. But anyways, so kind of moving onwards. Hopefully you've got something more cheerful. I mean, if you don't, it's okay. But,
Right. My
Go
question is
ahead.
actually from the Hunger Artist.
Mhm.
What do you guys think? When do we draw the line between what's art and entertaining, and what's destructive and something too explicit for us to see? And what do you guys think about the Hunger Artist being a form of art?
Mm.
I mean, I think art and entertainment, like, they come together kind of equally, because I mean, like, even if somebody goes to an art museum, you know, you look at a painting, like, you get so much enjoyment out of it. Like, you're entertained by the picture, and what's in it, but also, you know, you're also recognizing, like, the artistic part of it, like the beauty and like the work that must have gone into it. So I think that, you know, I definitely think there's like an equal line between both there. I mean,
I also think that his art, like his art of starving himself, was like his form of identity. That's what he recognized and knew himself as, and like the fact that people didn't understand and couldn't like interpret, I guess, what he was going through and why he was doing it, like added to his suffering. So like that just kind of like made him do it even more. Like it never gave him a reason to stop. So he just kept on starving himself to, like, I guess, carry on that identity that he thought he had.
In a different vein, I think that when I was reading The Starving Artist, I think people saw him as the object of art because he was this emaciated man, just kind of like groveling in a cage. But what he perceived his art to be was the act of starvation itself, that imperceptible action that people then denied or criticized or doubted. And that was a point of frustration for him. But to answer your question, like, when does the act become so indescribably horrific that we kind of have to say, no, this is a little too much? And I think a component of it, as described in The Starving Artist, is if you can't really understand what the art is in the first place, if there's such a disconnect between the person producing it and what they seem to be the art, in his case, the actual fasting process, versus what everyone else saw, which was the entertainment, the grotesque entertainment of kind of looking at this dying man. And like, a part of that is, can you even make out what the message is in the first place? And that kind of blurs things even more so.
I think that there's definitely some humility in art. I think that even in this story, it's obvious that, you know, he was kind of proud of what he was doing. He was proud that he could starve himself. But I think there is a problem when it almost became so mundane that, like, people would just walk past him as though it were nothing. And I think it kind of lost a sense of, I don't know, like, of it being art, you know? I think people just took it for granted, yeah. And I think that was basically, like, the main point of the story, is that, like, he thought this was such a special, like, unique thing, and, like, people couldn't see that for what it was. And I think that kind of speaks to art itself in general, like, in a more worldly sense. I think that people kind of view art in a very, like, you know, mundane way, and that they don't see it for what it actually is. Yeah.
I think that I'm in agreement with, like, the general consensus that art is more about what, like, the message that the perceiver gets from the art. And in this situation, if the audience is taking something away from the Hunger Artist and saying, you know, like, maybe this is about pushing boundaries, maybe that, you know, he's showing that there's, like, no limit on something, maybe I should think about this in another way. If they can take that message and apply it to their lives, then I think that that art is successful. But from another point of view, I think that the limit as to where we should draw the line between art and something that is, like, too dangerous or too much to be seen is in the opinion of the artists themselves. It's the lens that they want to put themselves through in order to communicate the message that they're aiming to. So in this case, if it's the Hunger Artist's desire to push himself so far as to death to communicate his message, then I personally think that it's up to that artist whether or not we think that that's just or right.
And I think maybe along with the lines of the purposefulness of it, I think that in the book, the Metamorphosis, we see the daughter liking to play the violin because she enjoys that. It kind of gives her and it's beautiful and it sounds good. And the starving artist, to some extent, you could consider art, and he sees it to be so. But his justification and purpose is because he doesn't like the taste of any food, and so that kind of like twists it a little bit. And it's like it doesn't have the same purity of purpose. The same. It's not to generate beauty or to inspire wonder. It's his secret is that it's because he just can't eat. He just doesn't want to eat because the taste is kind of so foul and vulgar that he doesn't really like it. I don't know. Maybe what do you think the dividing line is, or what do you think? Do you think he pushed it too far?
I think so. I feel like once something is hurting someone, we shouldn't call it entertainment. For example, if models are starving themselves to be models, in this day and age, that's viewed as a disorder, and it's not something that's beautiful. So I feel like in the same light, he's doing something to himself to harm himself.
And like the admiration of it is like the condoning of his like suffering, basically.
Yeah.
But to go off of that, like, do you think that his point of doing this is to entertain others, or do you think that this is something for himself? Because I think that is something a little bit different. Because I can definitely agree with you and say that if you're doing something for somebody else's approval or somebody else's entertainment, then it's much different than doing something for yourself.
Either way, I think it's a problem, because like even him doing it for himself, even him starving, for himself, it's still an issue, and that's why he died in the first place. Is because even he was doing it to reach his own personal goal of going as many days as he could without eating. But I think in doing that, he harmed himself without even realizing it.
I mean, I'll close things out with the last question, again related to art, but this time in Kafka. And there's the one poignant scene where, as the mother and daughter are moving things out, the guy aligns himself with one particular piece of furniture, that being the painting of the woman that we saw in the very first scene. And so my question is, one, why do you think that Gregor picked that piece of furniture as something he wanted to save? And two, what is he trying to say about us and what we choose to value as people? And you can answer either one or both of those questions. But that was something I found interesting. And then I guess for the benefit of looking at it, it's on. It goes from it's the bottom of 77 into the top of 78 of that kind of saving act that he tries to take. So what do you think?
Well, if I remember correctly, that was a scene where I think it was he was clinging to the painting, because I think I looked at it as if he were clinging to his humanity in a sense, because I think he didn't want that painting to be taken away, because that was his last sense of his human self. Whereas if they had taken that away, then he would have had more room to crawl, and I think then he would have been giving into this new bug self. So I think it was a matter of the whole scene, I think, just spoke to him trying that parallel between him choosing his human life versus choosing his bug life. And I think ultimately he was clinging on to his human life, and I think that's what the painting was symbolizing.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that this scene with them trying to make him more comfortable with taking the furniture out and whatnot is a kind of a mental battle in Gregor's mind of his bug self and his human self, and trying to decide what he's gonna. Is he going to give into this bug life? Is he going to let this be his identity? Or is he going to cling to humanity and hope for the best, and hope that he's going to get back there, and hope that he can enjoy his room the way that it was
Comfort.
at some point?
I definitely agree. I think there's definitely a struggle between his humanity and his new bug life. I feel like he likes his bug life, but then again, still at the same time, he wants to be human so that he can communicate with his family. But I don't know. It's a strange struggle to think about. But I definitely think that that he's getting used to his bug life more than he is with his own human life.
I think it's his internal conflict, like Ms. Gutierrez says. It's his last, I guess, item he has, which symbolizes his last kind of shifting between the bug life and the human life. And I think that when he fully lives the bug life is when he basically hides away, he wants to be alone. And I think that's him really kind of showing that he is fully transformed in that, because he's isolated, he's no longer doing the things that he used to do, and the fact that he doesn't want to be seen just shows that he has lost all of his human contact basically, and he can't communicate with his family because they don't understand.
Yeah.
And I guess so if he's torn between being this beetle and being this human, and this is like an affirmation of his humanity, then I guess closing out, then what does that mean about us? What does that tell us about us as readers, as people, as the actual humans that interact in the world that aren't bugs?
I guess it's like, what life do you want to choose for yourself in a sense? Like
Right.
what do you have to hold on to, and what gives you meaning in your life?
Yeah, sometimes we just hold on to things just because it makes us feel normal. And for example, I actually don't have an example, but sometimes we just hold on to things because we want to feel normal. We want to feel like we haven't changed, and that's something we have in our nature.
To fight change, to feel kind of like things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
You can say something.
Or I don't know, holding on to. Sometimes we'll hold on to things to kind of just remember old times as opposed to, like if you're changing. What's an example? I don't know. Like sure, like a painting that
Yeah.
you drew when you were younger. If you want to just remember those
Something like
times.
nostalgic in a sense.
Yeah.
And we see that's like one of the first things he clings to, right, in that first page. And it kind of reminds him of that humanity that he had before. I guess my closing thought was it's beautiful, and that it's in the hideousness of his own form. It's this beautiful woman that he kind of identifies with, and as humans, we are attracted to what's beautiful. And in that moment, it's all he can kind of think to go towards. It talks about how his eyes lit on the picture, and quickly made his way up the wall to kind of press himself against it. But anyways, this was an interesting discussion on death in the bug's life. So thank you all. Well done.
Thank you.
Conclude our discussion.
Alright, cool.